Good morning. Good morning. As Ray said, I am from Alabama, so I got to give a big roll tide this morning. I hope you won't hold that against me. I know a lot of you probably wear orange, and I'll try to love you anyway. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. I was blessed to be able to speak here this past fall, and you were all just so kind and so loving to me when I was here. And I appreciate this congregation. And of course, Miss Kay, I won't say too much. She'll get mad at me later, but appreciate Miss Kay and Ray. Love that their names rhyme. I think that's like the coolest thing ever. So they're great. But this morning not just this morning, but as I was preparing, I thought about this theme and then the specific topic. And I think the theme is so cool. Dare to be different. And I know we're focusing in on the young people throughout this series, and I looked at the list of speakers, and I shouldn't even be on it. Y'all have some wonderful speakers coming your way, and I know it's going to be a blessing to you all, and hopefully I'll be able to get out here and hear some of them as well. But the idea of daring to be different, but not just as young people, as older people. What does it mean to be different? Why do we want to be different? I think the brochure for this whole series says we're not trying to be different just for the sake of being different, or else we're just like everybody else. But this is a call that we see throughout the Bible. Do we remember Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 where it says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye" what? "Transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." He says, you're not supposed to fit in here. You're supposed to be different. I think about Jesus in John chapter 17 as he's praying for his disciples, and in verse 14 he says to his Father, "I gave them thy word, and the world hath hated them." Why? Because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. And in verse 16 Jesus says it again. He says, "They're not of the world, even as I am not of the world." And I'm going to tell you this morning, it is a joy to be challenged with the thought of daring to be different, because if Jesus is not of this world, I don't want to be of this world. Why would we try to be just like this world when Jesus himself prayed to God and said, "I'm not from here. This isn't my place. This isn't my people's place." So we see this call in the Bible, and it's such a wonderful challenge. Dare to be different. It's not easy. And thinking specifically about the idea of being different in faith. And I believe what Ray sent me in particular was an example of faith. And there were a lot of ways to take that. I thought about simply looking at Abraham and his life and kind of drawing some parallels, but instead I want you to think about how you, particularly as young people in your environment, because it's very difficult there, can be an example of faith. What are some things, what are some attributes we can have that will make us examples of faith to this world? Because when you think about it, especially the young people, I'm only 2 years removed from high school. Now I get to go to Hardeman, and I'm blessed to be sort of in a bubble. It's not always easy, but it's easier. But I remember public high school, and what did the world tell us? And what does it still tell us? Even the people, you who are in work environments now, it says you need to be this way, and you need to dress this way, and you need to talk this way, and you need to do these things, and if you don't, you're what? You just think you're better than everybody else, don't you? Well, you're just a goody two-shoes. Or maybe the world says you're just too scared. You hide behind your faith. That's the only reason you act that way. You just don't know any better. You're scared of the world. I would tell you this morning that, on the contrary, we're not scared of this world, but we have a better hope. We have a better purpose in this life than to do everything that people here tell us. And because of that, we dare to be different. And we dare to live as examples of faith in a world that is always telling us, sit down, shut up, and do exactly as I say. So what does it take? I think this morning about, and I know it's not the greatest example of a movie, it's rather violent, but have any of you seen the movie 300? It tells a story, actually a true story, of the Spartan army. And so Sparta's a small city at the time, but man for man, they are the greatest soldiers in the world. I mean, they're like the Navy SEALs. They're the Green Berets. They're Delta Force. These guys are good. I've done some research on them. Spartans trained from the time they were 7 years old, if they were found worthy. If they were found tough enough and strong enough, they would train from the time they were 7 years old to be soldiers. They did nothing else. That was their whole purpose in life. And in this particular movie, you have King Leonidas, and he has 300 men that he's taking out to battle against Xerxes, king of the Persian army. And he has millions. He has the largest force in the world. They're not as good of soldiers, but he has such staggering numbers that nobody can stop. And so the Spartans take off. They're on the war path. They're heading for the place where they're going to meet the Persians, and they come up against a group of allied soldiers. And this king has thousands, not as many as Xerxes, but a lot more than Leonidas, the Spartan king, does. And he says, we heard Sparta was on the war path, but we figured your devotion would at least match our own. How are you going to come up against Xerxes with only a handful of soldiers? And Leonidas looks at him and he says, doesn't it? Does our devotion not match yours? And he points at one of the man's soldiers and he says, you, what is your profession? And the guy says, I'm a sculptor. And he points at another one. Maybe it was Kenneth. And he says, you, what is your profession? And he says, I'm a potter, sir. He points at one more, and the guy says, I'm a blacksmith. And Leonidas kind of laughs, and he turns around, and he looks at his Spartans, and he says, Spartans, what is your profession? And they give this loud battle cry as if to say, this is it. This is everything. This is all we are. And I think as Christians today, we see a similar call from God's Word when He says in Matthew 16:24, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And in Luke chapter 14, where He says, anyone who comes to me and hates not his father and mother and brethren and wife and children and sisters and his own life also, he cannot be my disciples. And we see in this idea a feeling of being all in. If we're going to be examples of faith in the world, it's not going to be possible if we're, I go to school throughout the week and then on Sunday I put on my armor and I go to church and I act like a soldier of Christ. It's not going to work if we go into a place of profession and around our coworkers we act just like everyone else and we blend in, and then on Wednesday night we get up and teach the teenage Bible class. But if we dare to be different every single day, and we put on that armor that we read about in the book of Ephesians, and we carry it, that's when we'll be examples of faith. I know this is supposed to be geared towards the younger people, but here's one for the older folks for just a minute. I love the Andy Griffith Show. It's my favorite. And there's one particular episode where you may remember, I think it's the guy who's like sweeps out the butcher shop, keeps sweeping trash into the street. And so Barney gets onto him, gives him a ticket, and the guy says, if I ever catch you out of uniform, I'll get my $2 worth for whatever the ticket costs. And so Barney wears his uniform to sleep at night. He wears it, he's planning to wear it to a dance, and Andy finally says, what are you doing? And he finds out about the threat. And Andy tells him, Barney, if the uniform is something we put on in the morning and take off at night, we've got nothing. It's not just something we wear, it's who we are. As a Christian in this world, you don't just get up and put on a face for people. It's who you are. It's what you are. Every single day. Like Sam talked about this morning, it's your heart. Are you living as an example of faith? I want you to think, and I'm actually going to get into the points now, and I promise it won't take as long as it sounds like it's going to, but if we're going to be examples of faith, number one, we have to be courageous. No, we're not scared of this world. It actually takes a lot of courage to be different. Go to Daniel chapter 3 with me. It's such an obvious example, but it's such a wonderful example of some men of God who dared to be different. Again, in a world where everyone else was the same. Daniel chapter 3, you know the story. Nebuchadnezzar set up the golden image and he said, when I sound the music, you bow down and worship. Simple enough. But there's three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they don't. They refuse. They won't bow down. And so we come to verse 14, and look at what Nebuchadnezzar says to them. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, is it true? O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. He says, I'll give you a second chance. Try one more time. If you do it, no big deal. We'll kind of forget that other thing happened. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same out into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And watch this. And who is that God that will deliver you out of my hands? It's almost like he says, yeah, we'll just see. You just go ahead and try it. We'll see if God delivers you. Look at their answer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve, he is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. I want you to go back and think about what it says at the end of verse 16. We're not careful to answer you in this matter. In the world today, there's a lot of things that, as we said earlier, everybody is saying, you need to believe this, and you need to think this way, and you need to talk this way. And we, as examples of faith in this world, we need to have the courage to stand up, not on our own authority, but with the backing of God's inspired word, and to say, we're not careful to answer you in these matters. This is the way we're going to live our lives, and what you have to say has nothing to do with it. And you see these young men doing that. And they go so far as to say, and you know, even if God doesn't deliver us, we're still not going to bow to your golden images. Do you see the courage of these men of faith? Nothing's going to stop them. This is not an optional faith for them. It's a foundational faith. It's not something that comes and goes like Barney Fife's uniform. It's who they are. I think another word that goes along well with that, and it's in Acts chapter 4 and verse 29, if you want to turn there, is the boldness that we should have as examples of faith. You get to Acts chapter 4, and the disciples have been preaching Christ, and they're preaching him crucified. And as you can imagine, the Jews who they're accusing of crucifying him are not very happy about this. And what did they basically say? You better quit. Stop. Don't want you to talk about Jesus anymore. Don't be telling anybody that we crucified him. But look at verse 29. This is the disciples, and it says, And now, Lord, behold their threatenings, and grant unto thy servants that with all boldness they may speak thy word. What I want you to see here is being courageous, being bold for God doesn't mean we're never scared. What did they say there? God, look at the way they're threatening us. Look at all of this, and please help us to be strong enough because it's getting hard. Help us to be bold enough, to be brave enough to go and to keep talking about Jesus, even though we know it could cost us imprisonment or even our lives. Do you think they were granted that boldness? Go one chapter over, the exact same verse. Verse 29 of chapter 5. Now the council has brought them and said, Did we not straightly, what does it say? Did we not straightly command you that you should not teach in his name? And then notice what verse 29 says. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, We ought to obey God rather than men. We hear you, but we'd rather obey God. You know, today we don't face a fiery furnace. We don't face a lion's den like Daniel did. We don't face a giant like David did in 2 Samuel chapter 17. We don't face those things. But I'm going to ask you, would you not agree with me that there are certain unwritten rules in society today? There's certain status quos and ways that you are supposed to act. Don't talk about homosexuality. You'll hurt somebody's feelings. Don't do that. Don't tell me I need to be at church on Sunday morning and Wednesday night. That's ridiculous. That's silly. That's old-fashioned. Why would you even try to tell someone that? Baptism is essential for salvation. Really? Okay. So you just don't love me, do you? It's not it at all. And they're going to say, well, you're just old-fashioned. And you know, the truth is, maybe I am a little old-fashioned because there were words written in the first century that I still believe. And I live by them every single day, and I hope you will too. Why? Because this is what he's called us to do, and we have to be courageous even when the world tells us everything we're supposed to do. That's when we look right back at the world and we say, I got you. I see your laws. I see your unwritten rules, but I'd rather obey God than man. And that goes in any situation. Maybe it's your coworkers. Maybe it's in a locker room. You've got people pressuring you to be something. Maybe it's in a relationship you're in. And if they're pressuring you to be ungodly, I would ask you or beg you, plead with you to get out of that relationship. Don't ever find yourself obeying the wills and desires of some man over what the Word of God says. Be courageous. Be bold for God. In the second place, I want you to notice, if we're going to be examples of faith in this world, it's going to take complete and utter obedience. In Dan Winkler's Hebrews class, he gave us a quote that said, the faith that saves is the faith that obeys. So as we think about being an example of faith, it's not enough that we simply say, I believe in God, but that has to move us to some kind of obedient action. Think about James chapter 1 and verse 22 where it says, "Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves." Go to Matthew chapter 7 and verse 21. I know you've heard this and read this many times, but what does it say? "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but who? He that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. For many will say to me in that day, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, Depart from me, I never knew you, ye that work iniquity." Here were people who said, "God, I know who you are." They said, "Lord, Lord," but the problem was they weren't doing things God's way. We have to be obedient. There's a story, and I don't know if my mind's just been at times on old-time battle or what it is, but it's a story about Alexander the Great. And he too, kind of like Xerxes, had an army that was just running over everybody. Some people he outsmarted with wit. Some people he just was bigger and badder than and defeated them. But he came to one particular city, and they had this huge wall. And it was like, there's no way. We're not getting over this wall. So Alexander, hoping to salvage some of his men and not have to lose a ton or completely lose his army, calls the king out and says, "No big deal, man, but I just want you to surrender your whole city to me." And the guy's like, "Hey, yo, Alexander, have you seen my wall? Like, I have a big wall over there. You're not, like, why would I surrender to you?" And so Alexander the Great says, "Men, line up." And they line up, and he tells them to march off a cliff one by one. And the ruler of this city watches in horror as Alexander the Great's men just topple to their death off this cliff. And after about 10 of them had done this, Alexander said, "All right, come back over here." And the king ultimately surrendered his city. Why? Sounds a little silly. Because he understood that any army whose men were literally willing to walk to their death at the very word of their ruler could not be stopped. And I'm going to tell you that if we as the church are going to be the kind of people that turn this world upside down, if we're going to live as examples of faith in this world, it's going to take obedience like that. No, he doesn't ask us to walk off a cliff, but I do think I remember him asking to kill the old man of sin. Sam, again, quoted it this morning, Galatians 2:20, "I'm crucified with Christ." We give that old man up. We live as living sacrifices. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. And God asks for obedience like that. Obedience that says, I've got my druthers, as my papa would call them. I've got the things I'd rather do, but I'll give those up for you, God. That's what it takes to be an example of faith in this world. In the next place, and it goes along very closely, well, it really just makes sense with the idea of being an example of faith. But if you're going to be one, you have to be focused on God in everything. And when I think about this, my mind goes to the fact that Christianity is intentional, isn't it? You might hear a kid go to school, take a test, and come back and say, "I made a B. Wasn't even trying." It just came naturally. But you'll never hear someone on the day of judgment say, "Whoa, nice, I made it to heaven. Wasn't even trying," because Christianity doesn't work like that. It's something that takes a daily choice. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 1 says, "If ye then be risen with Christ," what? "Seek those things that are above, where Christ sits at the right hand of the throne of God." And notice verse 2. Set. And I love that word "set" there. Doesn't it give you the idea of digging in? When a wedding date is set, what does that mean? This is when it is, it's not changing. And he says, "Set your affection on things above, and not on things on the earth." And then he gives you the reason. "For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God." And you notice he there isn't just saying focus on God and don't sin. He's saying let your affection, let the things you care about and desire be God. You go to James chapter 4. What does verse 4 say? Another one you know well. "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship with the world is enmity with God? And whoever will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God." So this idea of daring to be different, are you seeing the essentiality of that? He says, if you're just like this world, if you fit in with them, you're God's enemy. I know last time that I preached here, I preached on Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. But I would have you think about verse 1 again. We focused more on verse 2 that night. But verse 1 says, "Wherefore, seeing ye also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses," what? "Let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." He mentions two different things there that we need to lay aside. Obviously, the sin. We get that. Don't sin. Don't do these things. They separate you from God. Isaiah 59 and verse 2. But what about the weight? What is that? It's anything. Anything that's of this world that's distracting you from God. Maybe it's Netflix. Maybe, like me, maybe it's golf. Maybe it's fishing. Maybe it's girls. Hey, I'm 19. It's girls sometimes. But we all have those things, and you know what those things are, and they're weights. Because when you're trying to run this Christian life, you're trying to endure, you see that, and you kind of take a step over here, right? And you kind of take a step over here, and it takes your focus off of where it's supposed to be. And then he gives you the alternative in verse 2. He says, instead of that, looking unto Jesus, right? That's where I want your affection. Put it on those things that are bigger and better and eternal. Focused. If we're going to be examples of faith, we have to be focused. And we just read about running a race with patience. Think in the next place about the kind of endurance that it takes to be an example of faith. You go to Acts chapter 5, we just read verse 29. Towards the end of the chapter, you'll remember they've very staunchly been opposed by the council. And you get to verse 41. And what does it say that the disciples are saying? "And they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name." Can you imagine holding Jesus in such high regard that when you went through something bad because of your faith, you said, "Man, I'm happy about this. I am so glad I get to do this. I don't know that I fully understand that." The word endure means to suffer something bad or painful patiently. You go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and look at Paul. What does it say he went through for the cause of Christ? Here's a man who certainly is an example of faith, and you see his endurance when he says in verse 23, "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool, I am more. In labors more abundant, in prisons more frequent, in stripes above measure, in deaths oft. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice was I beaten with rods, once was I stoned." He says he had been in the deep a night and a day, and he talks about journeyings often, and perils of robbers, and perils of... And he just goes on and on and on. He suffered some bad and painful things, but he did it patiently. Why? Because of his faith. He loved God, he had given everything to God, and it didn't matter what he went through here, he was looking beyond that. And his faith wasn't optional. And you look at Paul and you see a man, at least in my opinion, who just personifies endurance. He personifies determination. He had a goal and he was going to reach it. Do you remember what he said in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8? "I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I have kept the faith." Why did he do it? He tells you in the next verse, "Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day." And here's the part that should give you hope, and not unto me only, but unto all them also that love is appearing. That's me and you. And Paul said, that's why I endured. That's why I went through those hard times. I was working for that crown. I was working for that goal. Philippians chapter 3 and verse 14, I was just talking to a couple of my fellow students at Hardeman. They run on the cross-country and track team. I did the same thing in high school. Loved it. It was great. In Philippians chapter 3 and verse 14, Paul uses a running term when he says, "I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." The idea of pressing toward the mark is the thought of a runner stretching out, giving every last little bit at the end of a race. I remember running a 4x800 meter relay, and it was like, please let me hand this baton off. And as soon as I did, I just nosedived right into the ground. I was breathing in dirt. Coaches were like picking me up. I was done. I was spent, but I had to reach the mark first. I remember my junior year, my little sister was running the 4x400 meter relay. That's 4 people, each running a quarter of a mile, 1 lap. Sounds like no big deal, but it's a sprint. It's everything you've got for 400 meters, and it hurts, let me tell you. And she's running, and I was warming up, getting ready to run right after the girls' race, and I watched her the last 100 meters, and she's doing great. She gets to the last 20, and she's like wobbling. I mean, I thought she's just going to fall down. But she finished. Why? Everything in her body, her legs, her lungs, her arms and shoulders, everything was crying out and saying, give up. You don't want to do this. It's not worth it. Stop. But her heart had said before that race ever started, I'll reach the mark. I will finish this race. And there's going to come times in our Christian life where our flesh says, just give up. It's too hard. You can't stay away from this sin. You can't stay away from that person. The world is too mean to you, and that's when you have to have it set in your heart. I'm pressing toward the mark, and I'll make it. Ain't nothing going to stop me. I'm going to close this morning with thinking about Abraham for just a moment, and really a flash course of his life. Go to Genesis chapter 12 and read 1 verse with me. Abraham's a man, and if you'd like, go ahead and hold your finger in Hebrews chapter 11, and we'll jump right over there in just a second to read about 2 verses. But first, Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1. It says here, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And notice what the end of verse 4 says. Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Here's Abraham, a man who has no son, and God has said, I'm going to make thee a great nation. Oh, and by the way, Abraham, get up and leave your home. Go wander. Doesn't even tell him exactly where he's going. If you've become a Christian, God has asked you to do something very similar. He said, look, I know you're comfortable here, and there's the sins and there's the pleasures of this life, but I need you to step out of that, and I need you to go. And then, here's the sticker. Just like Abraham, he doesn't tell you what every step's going to hold, but he tells you it'll hold you every step of the way. He doesn't tell you that on this day and this year, your mother's going to pass away, and you're going to have to deal with that. He doesn't tell you that you're going to be bombarded with this sin or this struggle and surrounded by this kind of people, but he says, go. And it takes a lot of faith to take that step and to just go. And you look at Abraham and you go to chapter 21 and you see a man who has been through a lot. There are a lot of things we can talk about Abraham, but I want you to think about the fact that for 25 years he's been waiting and he has no son by his wife Sarah. And chapter 18 says that she was past the point of being able to have children. She laughed at the thought. Look at verse 5. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to man. Do you think it took faith for 25 years to wait? Sojourning in places you didn't belong, not knowing what was going to happen next, God having made a promise that you saw no real possibility of happening, but you held on in faith. And then go to the next chapter, and again we'll read about 2 verses. And this seems so strange. In verse 2 it says, And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. What would your response be? Why? God, I've waited so long and you gave me a son, and as you just said, I love him so much, he's my only son. Why would you tell me to do that? But it says that Abraham rose up early in the morning. Abraham didn't ask God why. He simply looked at who was giving him the command. He knows God is good. He knows God is faithful. He knows he's just. And so he goes. And you get to verse 4 and it says, Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place far off. You know how the story ends, but I want you to imagine being Abraham at this moment. You pick your eyes up and you see the place that you're about to go kill your son. You're going to have those moments in your life. You're going to see them coming off in the distance, and you're going to know that's going to be painful. Or maybe you've already made it there to the altar, and God is saying, I need you to give this up for me. And it hurts, and you don't want to do it. And everything that is worldly in you is saying, God, I love it so much. Don't make me do this. But if you, like Abraham, will press on in faith, knowing that God has your best interest in mind, He made Abraham a great nation. And now, through Abraham's seed, we've been blessed with salvation in Christ. You see in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16 it says, for which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our, what? Light affliction, which is but for a moment. It's momentary, it's worldly. Worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. He says, while we look not at the things which are seen. We don't look at everything around us, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So the question is, in that moment, when you see the altar, you see something difficult, what keeps you going? I said have your finger in Hebrews chapter 11. Look at verse 13. It says, these all died, how? In faith. Having not yet received the promises, but what? Seeing them afar off. And they were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were pilgrims and strangers in this world. Here are men and women of faith who were looking past those bad moments, and they were able to look to the promises God had made. And they were able to say, you know what? We don't fit in this world, and that's okay. I hope you'll do the same thing this morning. And when your faith gets tough and God is asking you to stand there with the knife and plunge it into whatever it is in your life that you love so much, that's when you take your eyes off the altar and you look to the promises. You see them afar off and you press toward them. Verse 16 says, for they desire a better country. That is in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city. If you live today and throughout your life as an example of faith in this world, He's prepared for you a city. I love the song we sang earlier. It's one of my favorites. In the sweet by and by, the thought is taken from John 14 and verse 6 when it says, for the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. An inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you. For you, if you're faithful to it. There's a quote by John Greenleaf Whittier, and I'll leave you with this in one more verse. He says, for all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest of these, it might have been. You know, when I think about the thought of reaching judgment and hearing God say, depart from me, how painful is it to think it might have been? I grew up hearing gospel sermons. I heard the Bible taught. My parents loved me enough to bring me to church for my own good. I knew what I needed to do. Maybe you even started your walk in faith, but you gave up along the way. And so instead of looking forward to an eternity with the God who loves you and wants to wipe away the tears from your eyes and who wants to give you everything that is good, you're looking forward to an eternity in a devil's hell where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. And my plea for you this morning is Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary in well-doing. For in due season, not when it makes sense for us, when it's time, in due season we shall reap if we faint not. This morning, if you're in a right relationship with God, rejoice. Go out and live as an example of faith in this world. Be a light. Dare to be different. But if you're not, make it right this morning. Come forward and put Christ on in baptism. Raise up to walk in newness of life. And do better than you've done in the past. Maybe you've done that, but you've grown weary in your well-doing. Come back to Him. He's standing there like the Father in Luke 15 with open arms. Would you come as we stand and as we sing?
Would you live for Jesus and be always good?